Imagine taking like a giant eraser to a globe.
Oh, wow. Okay, just wiping it all out.
Yeah, wiping away every single thick black line. No passports, no border patrols. You wake up tomorrow and you can just move anywhere on Earth at any time simply by walking there.
Right. Which sounds completely impossible to most people.
Totally. Because, I mean, we are so used to those classic political maps, the ones pulled down over the chalkboard in middle school classroom.
Oh, yeah, where every country is filled in with like neon pink or mustard yellow.
Exactly, or lime green. And they're all separated by these heavy permanent borders. As kids, we trace our fingers over those lines and we just accept that this is, well, the fundamental architecture of the world.
I mean, it creates this really comforting sense of like binary order, right? You were either here or you were there. Human beings generally just like things to be categorized and contained within neat little boxes.
We really do. Well, welcome to the deep dive. If you're listening to this, you are the learner. You're the kind of person who wants to, get past the surface level noise and really understand the mechanics of an idea.
Absolutely. And today we have a really fascinating mission.
Yeah, we're examining the specific, really thought-provoking essay by an author named Xu Feng. It came out in June 2024, and it's titled, Why Not Allow Free Global Movement and Migration?
Which is a very bold title.
It is. And the essay aggressively challenges the very existence of those thick black lines on the map.
The author is basically asking us to explore a massive, unprecedented hypothetical scenario. What actually happens to human society, to economics, and to our psychology if we just completely dismantle the concept of a sovereign border?
Right. And before we get into it, a really crucial disclaimer for the learner, because these ideas regarding immigration, government motives, and global security are, deeply politically charged. Our job today isn't to tell you if the author is right or wrong.
Exactly. We aren't taking sides.
No, not at all. We are just here to impartially stress test the architecture of their arguments so you can evaluate it for yourself. We'll unpack the underlying logic, see if the foundation holds up, and just lay out the ideas from the text.
Sounds good. And the very first pillar the author attacks is, well, it's the most primal fear people have about open borders.
The global stampede?
Right. The empty regions hypothesis. It's this pervasive fear that without physical barriers, the entire global south would just empty out overnight.
Right. The assumption is that billions of people would instantly rush into wealthy developed nations, like places like London or New York or Tokyo would just completely sink under the sheer population density.
Yes. And to counter this, Suefeng fires off a series of geographical rhetorical questions. They ask, have all Chinese people moved to Shanghai? Have all Americans moved to New York?
Which is a good point.
And they bring up Europe, too. Have all citizens of the 27 Schengen countries, which, for context, is a massive zone that essentially abolished its internal borders decades ago, have all those citizens suddenly moved to Switzerland just because it's wealthy?
Yeah. Or like, do tourists only ever visit the single most famous attraction in a city and ignore everything else?
Right. The author uses these examples to highlight a major discrepancy between our fears and, well, actual human behavior. Within zones that already possess total freedom of movement, we simply do not see 100% of the population migrating to the single wealthiest pinpoint on the map. The distribution remains surprisingly varied.
Okay, let's unpack this mechanism, because I have to play devil's advocate and push back a little on the author's comparison here.
So for it.
Because moving within your own country like an American, moving from, say, a struggling town in Ohio to New York City that has incredibly low friction, you speak the language, you know the cultural norms, your nursing degree still works, and you use the exact same currency.
Sure, the barriers are low.
Right. But moving across the globe from a developing nation to a wealthy one involves these massive, terrifying cultural and linguistic leaps. So are those two types of migration really driven by the exact same logic?
What's fascinating here is that your pushback actually highlights the very sociological anchor the author is relying on.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, the author is arguing that human behavior is not solely driven by a quest for the highest possible gross domestic product. Even when the friction is virtually non-existent, like your hypothetical person in Ohio, that person very often chooses to stay in Ohio.
That's true.
We have to ask why. And the answer is that people value a complex web of invisible tethers. Things like their extended family structures, their native language, the specific climate they grew up in, and their standing within a familiar community.
Ah, I see. So you're saying the social capital you have in your hometown often outweighs the pure financial capital you might gain somewhere else.
Precisely that. The author suggests we severely underestimate the strength of these organic community ties. We tend to view humans purely as, like, economic optimization machines.
Just calculators constantly maneuvering toward the biggest pile of money.
Right, but reality proves otherwise. Moving means severing your roots. And for the vast majority of human beings, the psychological cost of uprooting is vastly higher than the economic benefit of relocating.
Okay, I get that. But even if the sociology and the math show that we won't literally all move to New York, that still doesn't explain the intense desperation we see at borders today.
Right, the pressure is very real.
Yeah. So if the drive isn't purely economic, what is creating that massive localized pressure? And that's where the author shifts away from geography and dives straight into psychology, right?
They do. And this is a really fascinating application of behavioral economics. Specifically, it's the psychology of scarcity versus abundance. The author introduces a simple analogy regarding food.
Oh.
When food is scarce, people panic. They scramble to hoard it and they fight over it. But when food is completely plentiful, like in a fully stocked modern supermarket, nobody rushes.
Right, you don't see people throwing elbows to grab a loaf of bread when they know the shelves will be restocked tomorrow morning.
Exactly. And the text introduces this brilliant central metaphor to explain this dynamic with borders. The author writes, "Where there is a drop, a waterfall forms. Once the drop disappears, the waterfall ceases to exist."
That is such a vivid image. It visualizes the pressure perfectly. The border itself is the drop. It is the artificial cliff that generates the violent rush of water.
That's the argument, yes.
It totally reminds me of the VIP velvet rope effect at a popular nightclub.
Oh, that's a great analogy. How do you mean?
Well, if a massive, intimidating bouncer is standing behind a red velvet rope, a line will form around the block. People will stand shivering in the cold for 2 hours just staring at the door. Everyone wants to get in purely because an authority figure is telling them they cannot.
Right. The restriction creates the desire.
Exactly. Now, imagine the club owner fires the bouncer and removes the rope entirely. What actually happens? Sure, you might get an initial rush of people scrambling through the door for the first 5 minutes. But after that initial wave,
You just casually stroll in.
yeah, people will just wander in and out casually. They'll go grab late-night food. Maybe they'll come back later. Maybe they won't. The desperate, frantic desire to be inside evaporates the second the restriction is removed.
And the author actually concedes the reality of that initial wave you just mentioned. They readily admit that lifting global border restrictions might cause an, quote, initial chaotic situation as pent-up demand is released.
Which makes sense.
But they insist this would quickly dissipate and gradually become calm and stable.
Yeah.
The restriction itself creates a premium on crossing it. It becomes forbidden fruit. You remove the velvet rope. You remove the artificial
So
scarcity.
remove the drop, you remove the waterfall.
Exactly.
I mean, it requires a complete paradigm shift to look at immigration this way. We usually assume the wall is holding back the pressure, but the author is arguing the wall is actively generating the pressure.
Right. And moving beyond human psychology, the author takes this argument a step further by examining the biological laws of the natural world. They use this section to prove that absolute concentration in one place actually defies the laws of nature.
Oh man, the imagery in this part of the essay is incredibly funny and vivid. The author asks, have you seen all the birds in the world flying to places with abundant food? Have you seen all the fish in rivers, lakes, and seas swimming to the Indian Ocean?
Which sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud.
It does. And my personal favorite, they asked, have you seen all the mosquitoes and flies in the world migrating to the tropics?
It forces the reader to confront the logistical absurdity of the empty regions hypothesis we discussed earlier.
Just picture that for a second. Every single mosquito on planet Earth packing its tiny little bags and flying to the equator. It's hilarious, but it illustrates a fundamental scientific principle. We can't just brush past this.
No, we can't. Why doesn't nature concentrate like that? Because of carrying capacity.
Right. If every mosquito flew to the tropics, the ecosystem would collapse and they would all starve. If every human crowded into Tokyo, the infrastructure, the water grid, the sanitation systems, the housing market, it would all instantly fail.
Nature actively seeks equilibrium, not hyperconcentration. Hyperconcentration just leads to resource depletion. And the author anchors these biological realities back to a concept of human satisfaction. They pose another question. Once a person is full and satisfied, can they eat more even if a grand feast is presented to them?
With the grand feast representing a wealthy, developed nation with a booming economy.
Precisely. In economics, we call this the diminishing marginal utility of wealth. Humans, much like animals in an ecosystem, have a threshold of satisfaction.
So once you have enough, more doesn't necessarily drive you to move.
Right. Once a person's foundational needs are met, meaning they have physical safety, a reliable food source, and a supportive community, the mere existence of a larger feast in another country is no longer sufficient motivation to abandon their home.
Mhm.
If your stomach is full, the presence of a five-course meal on the other side of the world doesn't compel you to start walking.
Okay, so if we follow the author's logic up to this point, the whole overpopulation argument is dismantled. The physical world doesn't support massive concentration. The velvet rope effect will eventually settle into a calm river. And most people just want to stay in their hometowns anyway.
That's the first half of their argument, yes.
But what about the bad actors? Because the essay systematically pivots to the second major objection people have to open borders. And that's the fear that removing checkpoints means a global free-for-all for criminals and cartels.
This fear is deeply, deeply ingrained in the concept of the nation-state. We view borders as a protective filter, like a membrane designed to keep dangerous elements out of our local communities.
Right. And the author pushes back heavily against the idea that free movement inherently helps criminals evade legal sanctions. They challenge the premise by asking whether places with incredibly high government control and tight surveillance actually experience zero crime.
Because they don't. The author is questioning the actual efficacy of the security apparatus. Does the current, massively funded system of border control genuinely stop dedicated criminal syndicates, or does it primarily function as a dragnet that mostly just harasses ordinary travelers?
And the essay proposes a highly specific alternative, right? The author suggests taking the astronomical resources currently spent globally on border checkpoints, visa processing facilities, physical walls, and patrol agents, and just reallocating every single dollar of that capital directly to crime prevention and combating crime at its source.
Yes, a complete reallocation fund.
Okay, but I need to hold the line on my devil's advocate role here.
Please do.
Because to a lot of listeners, that probably sounds like taking the heavy deadlocks off the front doors of your house, leaving them wide open, and using the money you saved on locks to buy a high-tech indoor security camera for your living room.
That's a fair point.
Right, because a camera doesn't physically stop a burglar who knows there is no door. Is the author betting too heavily on international cooperation actually working?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the analogy of the house only works if the deadlock is currently keeping the burglar out.
Okay, fair.
The author's counter-argument focuses on how transnational crime actually operates in reality. Sophisticated cartels and criminal syndicates already bypass borders with relative ease. They utilize forged documents, they compromise officials, they use advanced smuggling submersibles, and they route funds digitally.
So the wall isn't doing what we think it's doing.
Exactly. The massive border wall isn't stopping the cartel boss. It's stopping the grandmother trying to visit her family or the migrant worker looking for seasonal employment.
So the author is essentially arguing the current system is merely security theater.
It's a pure cost-benefit analysis for them. The author sees billions of dollars and millions of man-hours spent checking passports as a fundamentally inefficient allocation of global resources.
Right.
Instead of maintaining a passive blanket defense that treats every single human being as a suspect by default, those funds could be diverted to active, targeted offense.
Like what specifically?
Imagine fully funding elite international financial tracking task forces that dismantle cartels by freezing their global assets, rather than trying to catch individual smugglers at a physical fence in the desert.
Okay. The strategy shifts from trying to build an impenetrable shield to funding a highly precise scalpel. It doesn't ignore the existence of crime, it completely reimagines the logistics of fighting it.
Precisely. Which brings us to the philosophical climax of the essay. The author has systematically attempted to knock down the foundational pillars of the anti-immigration argument.
Right. They've addressed the fear of an economic stampede, the psychology of induced demand, the biological laws of carrying capacity, and now the logistical realities of international crime.
And they summarize all of this with an incredibly definitive, absolute conclusion. The text states, in conclusion, free movement and migration have countless benefits for the public, but no harm.
Wow. Stating that an unprecedented global policy shift would have no harm is an exceptionally bold claim to make. I mean, zero harm.
It is very absolute, and the author follows that claim with the ultimate question. If total freedom of movement naturally reaches an equilibrium, if it removes the psychological desperation of the velvet rope, and if it's potentially better for funding targeted crime prevention, why do borders still exist?
Right. Why are the movements of global citizens still heavily restricted?
The author provides a stark and uncompromising answer. They state that the core reason borders exist is simply because the personal interests of those in power would be harmed by their removal. Therefore, governments do not allow ordinary people to be free.
So what does this all mean? We have to pause and highlight the zero-sum language being deployed here. The author draws a massive, brightly colored line in the sand between those in power and ordinary people.
The implications of that conclusion are incredibly heavy. The author is no longer arguing for a minor policy tweak like, an increase in H-1B visa quotas or a streamlined asylum process. They are delivering a fundamental structural critique of modern global governance.
It's a complete teardown of the system.
Yes, we are taught from a very young age that the apparatus of the nation-state border is a protective measure designed to keep citizens safe. The author is suggesting that this is a convenient fiction.
Which goes all the way back to that middle school map with the bright colors and the thick black lines we talked about at the start.
Exactly. The author's thesis claims those lines aren't there for your protection. They are mechanisms of elite control. They exist to maintain the status quo of global power dynamics, to tightly control labor mobility, to secure captive tax bases, and to ensure that ordinary people cannot simply walk away from an oppressive or mismanaged government to find a better one.
Wow. Because if citizens have total, frictionless labor mobility, governments suddenly have to actively compete to keep their populations. If you can vote with your feet instantly, a state loses its captive audience.
A completely open globe introduces the ultimate form of capital flight and labor flight. If an administration enacts terrible policies, the population just leaves. Borders, in the author's view, protect the state from the consequences of its own failures by trapping the citizens inside.
It's a staggering paradigm shift that completely reframes the concept of a passport. Instead of a passport being a document that guarantees your rights, your identity, and your protection abroad, the author's logic paints the passport as a leash.
A leash is a great word for it.
It becomes a literal permission slip from the ruling class, serving as a constant reminder that you are only allowed to move because they temporarily say you can.
And this framing forces the reader into a defensive posture regarding the status quo. If you disagree with the author's conclusions, you can no longer passively rely on the assumption that borders are inherently good.
You actually have to defend them.
Exactly.
Right.
You have to actively articulate why ordinary people should not have the freedom to move. You are forced to scientifically, economically, and sociologically defend the necessity of the velvet rope.
Okay, let's briefly recap the intellectual journey we've just taken through this essay. Zhu Feng started by dismantling the primal fear of mass migration, using the Schengen area and the velvet rope analogy to illustrate how the restriction itself creates the pressure, the drop creates the waterfall.
Right. We then explored the natural world, looking at mosquitoes, carrying capacity, and the grand feast, to understand why biology and human nature ultimately seek equilibrium rather than hyper-concentration.
From there, we challenged the traditional security narrative, examining the logistical cost-benefit analysis of taking the billions spent on passive border walls and reallocating it to targeted active crime prevention.
And finally, we arrived at the author's core assertion that borders function primarily as tools of control, designed to protect the interest of the powerful at the direct expense of the liberty of ordinary people.
It really challenges the very foundation of how we organize human society. It's a massive amount of conceptual weight to process.
It demands serious reflection. And I wanted to leave you, the listener, with a final thought experiment that builds on the architecture we've just explored.
Oh, I love a good thought experiment. Lay it on us.
Imagine Shui Feng's dream actually comes true. You wake up tomorrow, and every single physical border, every passport control booth, and every visa restriction on Earth is evaporated. The thick black lines are gone. Total freedom of physical movement is achieved.
A completely borderless physical globe.
My question is, how long would it take for human beings to simply invent new, invisible borders to replace the physical ones?
Oh, wow.
Without an armed guard in a uniform checking your passport at a gate, would we immediately construct stricter economic borders? Would we see the rapid expansion of privately governed, walled megacities accessible only by wealth?
That's a terrifying thought.
Right. Would we enforce linguistic borders or create digital walls where access to the global economy is gated by technological privilege? If we remove the physical drop that creates the waterfall, does human nature inherently seek out a way to dig a new, invisible cliff just to recreate the barrier?
So are borders artificially forced upon us by a ruling class? Or is the primal desire to draw a line around what is ours a permanent feature of the human condition? That is a deeply fascinating and honestly slightly unsettling question to sit with.
It really is.
Well, thank you for joining us on this intellectual journey today. Keep challenging the structures around you, keep asking the hard questions about the systems we take for granted, and the next time you look at a world map, take a really close look at those thick black lines. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.